programs because there we go. Okay, so we are live on YouTube. Perfect. Okay. So hello and welcome to Lines in the Sand, Humanity's Place at the Summit for Democracy, a side event to the summit organized by the Global Democracy Initiative. This amazing panel discussion with global democracy experts will be directly followed up with an after party in the VR democracy world or space from 21 to 22 UTC. You can access that event with the link in the video description. And there'll be more info about that at the end of this panel discussion. My name is Eston McKaig, and I'm the president of the Young World Federalists, and I'll be moderating the panel discussion today. I'm joined today by our four panelists. Firstly, we have Gery Colombo. Gery originally comes from the world of medical rehabilitation robotics and serves on the board of several organizations and companies in the field. In 2019, he founded GLOCO, an organization that wants to solve global problems by introducing a global democracy. Gery also started the Global Democracy Initiative to bring like-minded organizations together to exchange different ideas and to work with united forces on a global solution. Next, we have Dr. Rasmus Tenbergen. Rasmus is a negotiation expert, social entrepreneur, and global democracy activist. He is an executive director of the Institute for Leadership Development and specialist for the Harvard concept of principled negotiation. He started the World Parliament Experiment, which is an online global democracy platform that utilizes elements of representative and liquid democracy to facilitate the search for solutions to some of the world's biggest problems. We are also joined by Guy Kennedy. Guy is the co-founder of VR Democracy, a next-generation platform for civic engagement, enabling democracy advocates to share knowledge, collaborate on public policy, and participate in democratic discussions and debate. Students in VR Democracy develop skills in media literacy, critical thinking, public policy making, public speaking, debating, moderation, and leadership. And as mentioned, the after party for this panel discussion will take place in the VR Democracy platform. Last but certainly not least is Fernando Iglesias. Fernando is co-president of the World Federalist Movement Institute for Global Policy and a member of the parliament in Argentina. He is also the director of the Campaign for the Latin American and Caribbean Criminal Court Against Transnational Organized Crime, or COPLA, and the co-chair of the UNPA, United Nations Parliamentary Assembly Campaign's Parliamentary Advisory Group. He is also a founding member of Democracia Global and directs the Alterio Spinelli Chair for Regional Integration at the Consorzio Universitario Italiano per la Argentina. Thank you all very much for being here. I'm very excited to hear your perspectives on today's topics. For a bit of background before we get started, I'll say the US-led Summit for Democracy is a convening of governments, civil society, and the private sector to discuss ways to defend against authoritarianism, fight corruption, and promote human rights. Each of our panelists specializes on the topic of global democracy and will first present their views on the summit and the role of world citizenship and online democracy can play in overcoming geopolitical divides. I'll now turn to our first panelist, Gery Colombo, for his thoughts. Gery?
Yes, thank you very much, Eston, for this very nice introduction and also for setting this meeting up. And I would like to give my view first. So what it says in the Summit for Democracy is that they want to set forth an affirmative agenda for democratic renewal. And in our view, and I represent the GLOCO view, right? GLOCO stands for Global Community. In our view, 2 points are very important in the future. And I think one point is that we have to include all of the people in the world into the democratic processes. And number two, we need to solve the biggest issues of the world that we have today. And some of these are really global. So for both of these topics, a global democracy that is complementing the existing national democracies seems to be very important. For example, very soon there is the 6th review conference of the Convention of Certain Conventional Weapons to be held from the 13th of December in Geneva. And also there will be a line in the sand, right? Because the West is going along, or rather even leading the way, with the spiral of rearmament on the grounds that Russia and China are doing the same. From a national perspective, there will never be an end to this development. How should nations find a solution to this or other issues like nuclear weapons if all parties involved have a national perspective to consider in the first place, and a global solution can only be second thought? Only if all countries would go in the same direction with the same global solution can issues like this, or also the climate issue, be resolved. With climate change, taxing issues, or military rearmament, there will always be national interests in the focus if solutions are developed within the existing institutions. Unbiased and therefore hopefully sustainable global solution must be developed completely detached from national interests. And this can only be done in an independent, open, and above all, global, inclusive body. That is why building a global democracy system is crucial at this time. The global issues are becoming the most urgent ones. And I think the 27th UN Climate Change Conference in Glasgow in October showed that national representatives will always protect national interests in the first place, as this is their primary mission, and not have the global solution as a priority for their decisions. Today, we all have the tools available to implement the digital and global direct democracy. The time has come to create a platform for exactly this. First, give an identity to every global citizen, maybe above a certain age, like 16. Second, collect the global issues from the people in all the regions around the world. Third, let multidisciplinary and globally inclusive groups work out solutions with the global aspect in the focus and not the national ones. And fourth, have direct democratic decisions based on voting by ideally as many global citizens as possible. It will be a longer journey to get a global democratic platform implemented, with a majority of the global citizens participating in the voting process. But maybe it is a good, or even the best, way to bring the democratic principles closer to people living also in lesser democratic countries. A global democracy like the one that GLOCO and other partners within the Global Democracy Initiative that Eston just mentioned are working on could maybe be a very useful learning tool for people from all different backgrounds, besides the final goal of solving pressing global issues. Maybe parts of the platform could even be used for other local or national deliberation or voting processes in the future. Globalization and the internet give us the opportunity to introduce a global democracy without having to take national institutions into account. At the same time, global democracy should not compete with national governments. Ideally, with the new platform, global solutions can be found that are feasible and sustainable for all regions of the world, which can then be implemented at the national level, and like this, reunite the world rather than drawing lines in the sand. The time is here to globalize democracy. It has to happen as soon as possible. And we from GLOCO hope that many people will support this endeavor. And yeah, that's our view from GLOCO. And we thank Eston again for bringing the people in the panel together. And we're looking forward to hear the view of the other panelists. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Gery. Okay, so now we turn to Rasmus Tenbergen. Yeah, I'll turn the floor over to you.
Okay, thank you very much, Aston, for inviting me and for organizing this event and discussing these interesting questions. Let me start with a disclaimer. I think the questions are so interesting that I prefer to be here as a private person. So, of course, I'm the founder and director of the World Parliament Experiment, an online platform that is already going on, also as the global voting platform of Democracy Without Borders. But there are different perspectives on the questions discussed here today. So I would like to give you my personal view. I'm also a member in different roles of Democracy Without Borders. There's an official position paper of Democracy Without Borders, which I support with 13 points on the question of a community of democracy. But I would like to take the discussion a little bit beyond that. And on our online platform, the World Parliament Experiment, those questions can be discussed between community members. Having said this, my basic thesis here to answer the first of Aston's question, how can we promote inclusive global governance, is that this should be a combination of different approaches inside and outside the UN, with a community of democracies, but also with a community of democrats, including, and that relates to the second question, online tools, how to promote this as in our project or other similar projects. The first combination seems to be a contradiction. So how can a community of democracies be in accelerator and be inclusive, because not all countries are democracies? On the other hand, I think it is necessary that if we want to achieve inclusive global governments, preferably from my perspective within the United Nations, we need pressure to accomplish that. We need pressure both from the top and in a top-down approach and in a bottom-up approach. So I think it is good if democracies organize themselves and define standards of democracy and create new norms in global governance. On the other hand, of course, this is not enough. We have also to deal with the problem, what do we do with people who live in non-democratic countries? And for that, I think in addition to a community of democracies, we need something like a community of democrats, online and offline. And this community of democrats is organized in an easy way, I think, in online procedures. So we invite people to use our platform, in which you can, and similar platforms in which you can make proposals, discuss them, vote on them, lobby for them. I have presented a model in a Democracy Without Borders discussion paper called United Humans instead of United Nations, how we can organize ourselves as world citizens and influence international policies. So let me try to answer your two questions with that paradox. Yes, I think we need some kind of state-organized collaboration between democracies, but it's even more important that we do not miss the second aspects that seems to be equally important, that ordinary citizens organize themselves and create this second instrument of pressure, if you like, to develop inclusive global governance. I look forward to discuss this further with you. Thank you for the moment.
Thank you very much, Rasmus. Very, food for thought, for sure. Next we have Guy Kennedy. Guy?
Thanks, Eston, and thanks very much, Rasmus and Gery. That was really interesting. So thank you again to the Global Democracy Initiative and Eston for putting this together. And I'll just preface this by saying that my answers to these questions are my own personal views. I also represent VR Democracy, which is looking to create a platform and make it available to the widest possible population for people to actively contribute to global democratic discussion. And there's a number of ways that we can go in this, and this is why one of the things we're really excited about is the connection and the partnership with the Global Democracy Initiative and the individual groups within that. So yeah, I'll just looking at the first question: what can world citizens do to promote participatory global governance without alienating people from undemocratic countries? I think it's worth framing this debate by prefacing how did we get here? What leads us up to this point in time? So I think democracies have been complacent ever since the end of the Cold War. Most of the global democracy members thought that we were the ideological winner, and that has proved to be not the case. And now we're seeing a rise of different authoritarian governments challenging the global liberal democratic order. So I think what world citizens can do in this climate is to recognise that there are vulnerabilities to democracy and open societies. And some of these vulnerabilities have been exploited by authoritarian states. For example, misinformation, foreign influence, economic coercion, IP theft, cyber attacks. We've seen university censorship, and we've really only just begun to address some of these threats through foreign interference laws, Magnitsky laws to target corrupt individuals, also regulations to blacklist firms that have been involved in human rights abuses. Additionally, projects around trusted 5G networks, cybersecurity, cooperation on integrated chips, AI, quantum computing, and so forth. We're now starting to see the leading democracies recognise some of these threats and start to cooperate on some of these new technologies and laws moving forward. If you need any kind of example of what could happen if authoritarianism gains ascendancy, we only need to look at Hong Kong and the national security law to see what it looks like to live under an authoritarian government. So in that case, previously what was promised was one country, two systems, now become one country, one system. And I think the free world needs to see that for what it is, rather than the words that we hear out of authoritarian states. We need to look at what's actually happening on the ground. Additionally, world citizens should be clear about the value of democracy and explain respectfully to non-democratic states and people that we will not compromise on our principles, regardless of economic coercion and other threats. All that's going to do is push the democracies closer together towards tighter alliances. And after all, liberal democracies have the most innovative economies, the best universities, and the largest share of global GDP. So really, at the end of the day, the authoritarian states have benefited from the markets, the finance, the technology, the innovation of liberal democratic societies. And so we should be confident as well that our economies and our societies can not only be freer, but also more economically viable in the future. Also, in free societies with free media, we need to educate our own citizens in media literacy and critical thinking to counter the impact of misinformation and conspiracy theories, which tend to happen when you've got a free, open information environment. We need to engage more in respectful dialogue to solve real-world issues. we can, as global citizens, collectively highlight that democracy extends beyond just free and fair elections and the voting side of things, and includes rights and institutions such as free speech, free media, human rights, rule of law, transparency in government operation, freedom of association, and academic freedom. So these rights and institutions are a great strength of our democratic systems. So we need to highlight that, and also allowing our citizens to collaborate freely together without the fear of repressive government interference is actually one of our great strengths, even though we may not always agree on certain points. The ability to think and speak freely actually is a great strength in allowing us to come up with solutions to problems. We need to recognise that democratic rights must be balanced with citizen responsibilities as well. We hear about rights all the time. We also have responsibilities, and this means respecting alternative viewpoints and rejecting toxic discourse. So, and also highlighting our common values and strengthen our unity is an important responsibility for us. I think civic society or civil society is critical to the ability to strengthen our democratic societies, and also to counterbalance lobby groups which tend to distort the democratic system. And so with civic society actively participating, we can not only counter lobby groups, but be a people's voice to Parliament. So really to look at on the ground issues and solutions to people's everyday lives. I may have gone on a little bit long there. I would just, I'll briefly answer the next question, which is what role can online democracy and decision-making tools play in overcoming geopolitical divides? I think we need to be reticent of the complacency that's been in our society, and to work actively together to protect our democratic societies and recognise that we're all in this together. International cooperation between democracies, the union of democracies and shared experiences with threats, more economic cooperation, I think, will help, and also prioritising trade with like-minded partners, especially in next generation technologies that have an element of freedom and freedom from government oversight intertwined in them. So in terms of online democracy and decision-making tools personally, from our point of view, what we've done is we think we need to use the latest technology that provides the most compelling experiences for people. So in that sense, we've focused on virtual reality, which is a lot of fun. It's very compelling. It's exciting. We're all in the room together. So there are a lot of benefits to democratic deliberation and debate using this technology. We also need to be aware of some of the downsides of technology. So things like capturing people's attention, advertising to them, these sorts of things. So we design with humane technology principles, which respects human vulnerabilities and aims to support humans and improve their ability to communicate and be effective in their discussions. So yeah, I welcome you all to the VR democracy world after this. There's also an education element to what we do. We educate participants on the history and evolution of democracy, plus developing skills for effective policymaking, debating, and leadership. So I hope to see you all there after this event. Thanks again.
Thank you very much, Guy. Yeah, a lot to take in there. Okay, last but not least, for this short round of sort of introductions and answers to the two questions, is Fernando. Please take it away.
Here I am. Okay. So first, thank you very much for the opportunity of being here, to the organizers. Let's say what is, in my opinion, obvious. We are all in favor of a global solution for global crisis and trouble, and we think this must be based on two principles who everybody considers, or almost everybody consider as valuable and valid at the national level, meaning democracy and federalism. So we need some kind of to move towards a world federalism and towards a global democracy, and this is our basic agreement. I will make some historic consideration about the conditions for a change. I mean, if we look at the institutional situation, the social and political artifacts we human beings create in order to manage our problems, we have always the same sequence, which is crisis, war, reform. National states were created in 1648, Westphalia, or if you wish, 1815 Vienna Congress, after long periods of crisis, a final war, and a reform of the existing system. And the same happened when this system, based on absolute sovereignties, collapsed at the beginning of the past century. We had exactly the same sequence: crisis, war, reform. In 1940, in the short period between the end of the war, a little before the end of the war, 1945 and 1942, Korean War, more or less, we had a window of opportunity in which human beings created two big organizations who were able to manage the war in a progressive and appropriate way during the last decades. I mean, the United Nations, in a way, and the European Union, or the European Community of Carbon and Steel, and so on. And this was a period which closed with the Korean War, with the Cold War. There was no any possibility of moving forward the program of a world federalism or a global democracy or whatever during the Cold War. And I think we are crossing this again. It's the same kind of period in which we had a window of opportunity from the fall of the Berlin Wall to the fall of the Twin Towers. It was about 12 years in which we are able to promote something. World Federalist movement was really active on promoting the International Criminal Court. It was a big achievement. But this period has closed. And I'm afraid that our movement, meaning the World Federalist movement, but all the people who are global world citizens and the different organizations, we are still too close to the previous situation in which the opportunity was open. And now we had, since the fail of the Twin Towers, a different war which is becoming dangerous again. And we are inside this period till 20 years ago, since 20 years ago. So it's time for a change. It's time for a consideration of the historic period in which we are operating. This is my first consideration. And if we look at the experiment we did in past. First, let me say that the United Nations and the European Union saved the world from an apocalypse. The United Nations were created. This is Dag Hammarskjöld, the second Secretary General. He stated that the United Nations were not created to carry the paradise on earth, but to avoid the hell. And they were successful on this. We had no third world war, which will be apocalyptic, probably with atomic bombs and atomic war. And the European Union was also very important in this process. But it's also very clear that this is insufficient, and we are facing global crisis, and global crisis uses to become global wars. Crisis become war, and then reform. This is the first question. Are we human beings able to make a change before the crisis, before the war, before the collapse of the system? This is a big question to answer. And the second question, in my opinion, is which pattern we are going to follow, because here we have two very different patterns. The United Nations patterns means everybody on board. Everybody, you are democratic, you are not democratic, you are less democratic, everybody on board. We need to negotiate. We need a table in order not to have a third world war because of missiles in Cuba. And this was a good strategy because it saved probably more than one opportunity, the war from a nuclear war. This is a strategy. Everybody on board, and let's try to improve the organization, to democratize the organization, etc., etc. In this case, I don't mean this is closed. This is an active possibility, and I think the best strategy here is the United Nations Parliamentary Assembly in order to have a democratic reform of the United Nations and democratization of the global order, etc., etc., etc. And this is more or less the strategy of the World Freedom Movement in general, which was created basically related to the United Nations. But there is another strategy, which is the European Community of Carbon and Steel, which means, okay, we are democratic, we are six, we are few, but we are going to progress towards a more general union, but you have to be democratic if you want to join the club. And this is another possibility, and of course, this is more related to the tradition of the Union of European Federalists, which has also some risks, because I'm afraid that sometimes European Federalists are becoming, not all of them, but many of them, they are becoming some kind of European nationalists who think that they can fix the things inside the European Union, and no matter what happens in the rest of the world. And this is a big mistake, as deep as the idea of creating a democratic Europe without developing the regional integration, which was the origin of the Manifesto Ventotene and the federal critique to the absolute sovereignty. But coming back to this second strategy, is only democratic countries inside, and let's develop the union. This is close to the idea of Joe Biden, the idea of a community of democracy. And let's see what happens. This is a process which is ongoing, because it's 20 years from the fall of the Berlin Wall, but the consequences are really clear right now with this new Cold War between United States and China, and the democracies on one hand, United States, some democratic countries like Japan, European Union, etc., and China, which is closer to Russia and Iran, etc., etc. This has so this is a risky way, but we are living in a risky in risky times and in a risky world. Let's consider this possibility. I heard some proposals about this, about using the NATO, which is, in my opinion, a very bad idea, or the OCDE as part of this strategy of the community of democracy. Let's see what happens in these days with this American initiative. But I think this is not new in our movement. I remember a long time ago, I read Bertrand Russell's book, New Hopes for a War in Transformation, or something like that. And he proposed it exactly this way, a union of democracies. He was a little excessive because he proposed also to bomb with atomic bombs the Russian before they had the atomic bomb too, in order to save the war. It was Bertrand Russell, no, which is very expressive about the craziness of those times. But I mean, there is of this kind. Of course, I'm against that, and there is of creating some kind of conflict, two big blocks, another Cold War, and there is of atomic war, and Taiwan and Ukraine being the center of the conflict. We are facing this situation, and we need to face this. Concluding, there are these two possibilities, historical ones. Maybe there are others. Rasmus proposed some digital way to democracy and federalism, the global war. 20 years ago, we discussed it very strongly because I was against. No, it's becoming something completely utopic, in my opinion, but becoming a little more rational. How far is singularity? Nobody knows. Kurzweil is right or is wrong? Nobody knows. Let's see. But basically, maybe there are other ways to explore. I'm open to consider, but I think the two basic things are these two strategies. Everybody on board, United Nations, only democratic countries on board, European Union or European communities, etc. And we need to have, in my opinion, we have to be active in both of them. We need to promote United Nations Parliamentary Assembly in order to reform the first strategy, and the second strategy, we need to be alert about what happens at the level of the community of democracy, including the reflection of Gery and Guy about the fact that the civil participation and civil society are very important in order to avoid any kind of elitism in this process. But we need to have to reflect and to think about the second way, because it's closer to the window of opportunity. For the first one, it's closing, and we are very close to, we are living in a different world in which I think we should maintain these two basic strategies and an open eyes to new ones, as Rasmus and many others are proposing from the next generation. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you very much to everyone for your thoughts. You've touched on a lot of different topics. I think to sort of summarize, I see broadly sort of two different pathways here. We have, I think Rasmus, you put it quite well with this sort of like a government-led, alliance of democracies or a citizen-led, so sort of grassroots. It's more or less the top-down or bottom-up sort of thing. Will global democracy start from the people, or will it be led by Joe Biden himself and his friends? I mean, that question remains to be seen. I think, Fernando, you do bring up a good point. That does seem to be the way things are moving. At least there's more of an appetite for that sort of thing. But as you said, it does seem like a repeat of the last century. It's almost like, for me, it's like a copy and paste of the last century, or at least the second half of the last century. in terms of armament and nuclear war. And, my dad had to do flash drills where they would all duck underneath the table preparing for nuclear attack. And so I thought we were sort of past that point, but it definitely looks like a lot of people are walking straight into it with open arms. And so the question that I was sort of trying to, pose is, how do we as world citizens overcome this divide? Is it possible to use new technologies or existing methods of democracy and to overcome these divides that are quickly and you, Guy, I mean, you mentioned that the need for democracies to hold their ground and to not give in on their principles and to trade with like-minded countries, sort of build a block to sort of counter the other block. And so it's just, the question remains, is that will that prevent nuclear holocaust? I don't know, or will it usher it in? So those are sort of my thoughts, my summary. I wanted to open the floor up again to you all. We only have about 15 more minutes, and remember that Guy will introduce the VR Democracy platform really shortly at the end. And of course, we can continue the open discussion in the VR democracy space. So that's where we'll have a little bit more free-flowing discussion, but I'll open the floor if anybody has any immediate responses to each other. I see Rasmus, you're off mute, so I assume you have something to say.
Yeah, I just wanted to discuss the thesis with you. Is it that we need to work on all three levels? UN reform, Alliance of Democracies, and citizen-led digital technologies and so on. Because I think it's important for the strategy of our movement. So I would be interested whether there is there's support or a contradiction to that thesis.
Let me ask the question, why do you think normally evolution tries survival of the fittest, right? So evolution is normally that you have several approaches and the best one will survive. So I think it is actually, on one side, it's good that different organizations work on different solutions, and we will see which one will become the best solution, right? So I think, of course, you could argue that we're working maybe somehow a little bit against each other, because the World Federalists, of course, have a different approach, and the same resources could be used also for global democracy ideas. But as I said, number one, I think we still learn from each other. And I think number two, that the chance that we'll get a good solution is bigger if we work on try different solutions, because we don't know yet what the perfect system will be, right? And that's why I think it is good that different organizations exploit different solutions.
Yeah, if I may answer directly, that's there's no contradiction there. We should try different approaches. On the contrary, I was arguing for trying different solutions, but it's also a question of collaboration. How do we do this collaboration? And it's important that I think we agree that the inclusive approach is better than the exclusive. So in a certain way, I think the UN approach that Fernando mentioned should be our plan A, as the most desirable, United Nations Parliamentary Assembly and so on, which is the main project of Democracy Without Borders. But we have to face the reality that what if this does not happen? How can we bring others to follow the inclusive approach? And for that, I think the Alliance of Democracies is important if we manage to deal with certain shortcomings. And I think the third pillar can help us to do this. Liquid democracy approaches, for example, if we have virtual assemblies in which we give people in exile from undemocratic countries a special say, for example, that would be a way to go forward, in my opinion.
Guy, and then Fernando.
Yeah, I tend to agree that the two best options are the alliance of democracies led by the democratic states, which is what we're seeing now with President Biden. I think that's already happening, and it's likely that that will continue to solidify amongst the democracies, because there a lot of the especially smaller democracies are in a situation where they're being coerced economically, threatened militarily. It's only pushing democracies closer together. And I think the voting populace is going to pressure the parliamentarians, the representatives, to do that. The other side, the liquid democracy, the digital effort that we can all do together, this is the really exciting one, because whether it's education, whether it's just democracy advocates getting together through the world to unite around certain values and principles, I think that's something we can do without requesting permission of government. And there'll be enough of a personal drive from individuals to bring that together. And I think a lot of the opportunity is around simulating. What we can do in the digital world is simulate these new forms of world citizen democracy, or we can simulate many different models as well, which is really exciting, and everyone's welcome, because all you need is an internet connection. On the reforming the UN, my big question there is that, I mean, we need to really look at, say, China as an example. I mean, what would the Chinese think of this, the Chinese leadership? And it's pretty obvious that they're going in a completely different direction. What they're thinking is that we want to remake the international order with our principles at the center. And their principles are very, very different to what we're talking about here. So I don't see the any sort of negotiation with the Chinese Communist Party bearing much fruit there. So I think really the alliance of democracies and the digital simulations or online participation that we can all have together are the two ways that are most likely to be successful.
Yeah, I look forward to see your project in a few minutes. And similar to our project, I think there's one important question, which is, how do we combine it with the real world? Imagine if tomorrow there are 5 billion people joining your project or joining our platform. How would that connect to the real world? And that's why I think we need both the top-down and the bottom-up approach to do that together. That's my main
Absolutely. Point. Yeah, that's the critical question. I'm so glad you said that, because I think that the most logical way to do that would be to make this new citizens platform, or this digital democracy platform, make it integrate with real elections. So make it a leadership development platform. So as people go through the system, they can be educated in certain skills. The community can support new leaders that rise up through this new digital, very organic grassroots process, and then can support them in real elections. So the community could be broken down into electorates, voting areas, if you like, and that can have a direct link into national elections. And then from that point, once the new leaders are elected, then they're part of the same community. So they're less likely to be influenced by lobby groups, because they've got their constituents still online supporting them. And that becomes global in itself, because individual members of parliament that came up through the same global system can then cooperate within the system as well. So I see, but that's the critical question. How could we move from digital democracy to the real world?
Yeah, but I think the problem is not, I mean, once we have the 5 billion people in one system, then the problem is solved. Because if you have 5 billion people following or in one voting system, then you have the problem solved, because then the people that are voted for the nations, they have to follow, at least if there is an agreement within these 5 billion people. So I think the bigger problem is, how do you get 5 billion people into one platform? That's the challenge. But if you achieve that, I mean, look at all the NGOs, look at the Greta Thunberg with her movements. If you have a lot of people behind yourself, you will have an impact. That's not no doubt. But how do you get $5 billion people into one platform? How can you create a platform that unifies the people? That, I think, is the critical question.
Does anybody, because we had a question in the chat that was more or less the same. How can we raise the attention of a wider audience, not only the little circle of global democracy activists? So is there any thoughts, just really briefly, on how to answer that $5 billion question?
I would just agree with what you said, Gery, that once you've got that amount of global population in the system, then the problem is solved, as long as it is a trusted system that has real world benefits that people can see, have an incentive to join. Then, but it's actually developing that system to be compelling enough for people to join it. That's the critical question.
Let me just mention, I agree it is the more difficult part, but I don't agree the problem is solved. We have to be very clear what happens after that. If there's a big military conflict and 5 billion people say, we don't want that, that does not stop the conflict. So we have to think one step further, I think, and prepare for that situation. Even though I agree with you, the 5 billion supporters should not be underestimated. It's difficult and important, but it should also not be overestimated. We still have, let's say, 40% of the problem to solve after that happens.
Okay, we are nearing the top of the hour, so I know I encourage you all. We're going to continue the same discussion, just in a completely different format. So instead of looking at each other's beautiful faces, we'll be looking at an avatar. So I hope you're ready for that. I'm really curious. I see Fernando down there the whole time. He's at the bottom of my screen, and I see him. So I'm really curious what he thinks. He called it utopian at the beginning, so I'm really excited to hear the debate. So just before we close, I'll turn it over to you, Guy, to sort of overview the process of getting on to the VR Democracy event. The link is in the description already, so if that helps.
Great. So this is the new Athenian digital democracy that we've created. So that's what I think we've been missing with the internet the way it is, being text-based. So we haven't had that in-person element, which is critical for democracy. But so what you do is, if Eston has provided the link, just click on that link. You'll see a page where you can enter the event. So once you've downloaded AltSpace VR, you just click that button and then just look for the Summit for Democracy Global Democracy Initiative event and click that button and see you there.
Cool. Yes. Yeah. So it's important that you download our AltSpace VR initially, and it works on PC mostly, and I guess it's beta version in Mac. I don't know if it works great in Mac, but they have it available nonetheless. Okay. So yes, it's a lively discussion. So let's quickly, I'll end this. We'll move on. I thank you all very much for your time. And I look forward to seeing you all in virtual reality shortly. So thank you. Thank you very much.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you, everybody.
Thank you. See you in a minute. Bye-bye.